I never imagined that moving into my new apartment would turn into one of the most terrifying nights of my life. I thought I was starting fresh, leaving old relationships behind, and finally claiming a space that was entirely mine. A place where I could breathe, laugh, and feel safe. But that night, February 19th, everything changed. The night that was supposed to be a celebration of my accomplishments, a night of recognition, pride, and joy, quickly turned into a nightmare I could never have prepared for. Earlier that evening, I had attended an event where I was being honored. It was supposed to be a happy night, a moment of personal achievement. I wore my favorite dress, smiled at friends, and felt proud. But when the evening ended and I returned home, I was not greeted by peace. I was greeted by Darnell, my ex-boyfriend. He had been my escort to the event, polite, smiling, pretending everything was fine. But the moment we stepped into my apartment, the tension that had been simmering between us boiled over. Words were exchanged, accusations flew, and suddenly I realized this was no ordinary argument. I was in danger. It started with him accusing me of talking to another man at the event. I tried to explain, tried to calm him down, but he wasn't listening. He grabbed me, shoved me, shook me. I was barely dressed after getting ready for bed, and he wouldn't let me put anything on. Panic surged through me. My phone was snatched from my hands, leaving me powerless, trapped, and terrified. I tried to escape, but he confined me in different rooms, controlling every movement, stripping me of my agency. Desperation took over. I ran. Naked, I ran down to my neighbor's apartment, pleading to use his phone to call the police. Without hesitation, he handed me his phone, trusting me in the midst of chaos. I rushed back upstairs, my heart hammering, my mind racing, needing help, needing the authorities to see the reality of what was happening. I called the police, hoping for immediate action. But the first response was shocking. They didn't even come upstairs. They waved it off, labeling it a minor domestic dispute, leaving me to face Darnell alone once again. When he returned, the situation escalated. In a desperate attempt to assert some control, I grabbed his shoes and threw them out the window. It was symbolic, small, but it was my way of saying, "Stop. You cannot control me." He retaliated by smashing my iMac and throwing it out of the window. Blood, chaos, and fear filled every corner of my apartment. I stayed inside, trembling, waiting for the police to return, praying someone would finally intervene before it was too late. The second time the police arrived, the scene was even worse. Darnell had returned, cutting himself and spreading blood around the apartment to manipulate the situation. My fear was tangible, suffocating. It felt like I was living in a nightmare, and every attempt to survive only made the situation more chaotic. Eventually, this nightmare landed me in Judge Judy's courtroom. Her gaze was unrelenting, piercing, commanding. I felt the weight of her scrutiny as I recounted every terrifying moment, the grabs, the shoves, the confinement, the utter helplessness. I described how the police failed to act, how Darnell returned with injuries he inflicted on himself, and how I was left alone, defending my life. Judge Judy asked questions that cut straight to the heart of the matter, sharp and precise. "You're saying he spread his own blood around to frame you?" she asked, her voice steady but incredulous. "Yes, Your Honor." "That's exactly what happened," I replied, my voice trembling but firm. As the courtroom listened, I felt both exposed and empowered. Each word I spoke was a reclaiming of my own narrative. I explained my desperate choices, why I threw the shoes, why I stayed inside, why I acted in self-defense. Every moment was about survival, about protecting myself in a situation where every instinct screamed danger. Judge Judy dissected every detail, forcing me to confront my own recounting of events. She demanded clarity, truth, and proof. I told her about the police reports, the EMS notes, every mark, every injury, every act of fear. I could see her eyes assessing my honesty, her mind untangling the chaos to determine what actually happened. "I understand you were terrified," she said, "but I need to know exactly what happened, step by step." I told her about how I ran naked to my neighbor's apartment, how I used his phone to call for help, how Darnell had refused to let me put on clothes. I explained the shoes, the iMac, the chaos, the blood, and the repeated failures of the police to intervene. I spoke about fear, survival, humiliation, and desperation. I spoke about my truth. The courtroom was silent, the tension palpable. Judge Judy's gaze never wavered. I could feel her weighing every word, every detail, every emotion. It was intimidating, yes, but it was also fair. Justice in her courtroom demanded honesty, clarity, and courage, and I had to provide all three. By the end of the session, the full story had been laid out. The court saw my side, understood my fear, and recognized the chaos I endured. The events of February 19th had left scars, emotional, mental, and physical. But I had survived, and I had told my story. Judge Judy's tough, unwavering presence ensured that the truth was heard and understood. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. I had relived the nightmare, but I had also reclaimed my voice. The fear, the helplessness, the humiliation, all were transformed into words, into testimony that represented my side of the story. That day, I learned that even in the darkest situations, standing up for yourself, telling your truth, and facing scrutiny head-on could be a form of survival, a step toward justice. That night, I realized something important. Fear can be paralyzing, but courage is actionable. You can face danger, chaos, and disbelief and still reclaim your life. You can speak, you can act, and you can ensure that your story is heard, no matter how impossible the circumstances may seem. Judge Judy reminded me, and anyone listening, that truth, courage, and honesty are the most powerful tools we have, and that even when the world fails to protect you, standing up for yourself is the first step toward justice.